Book 7, Heaven is Fulfillment, Chapter 1. Invitation to an Angel. Janet and I sat on the veranda of our little house in the plain between. Just below us, the foaming waves crept up the golden sand. The sunlight leapt across the crests of waves and lay in splendour upon the jutting edges of rocks. Far out upon the horizon, clouds hung motionless in the sky of blue. I picked up an apple and munched it thoughtfully. Janet was drinking some of the sparkling fruit juice from a glass. A sunbeam alighted on the tumbler's rim, glinting and blazing like a diamond. We had been talking for a long time as we rested on our downy couches. First we had spoken of the delightful holiday we had had in the plain between, which, set between earth and heaven, had so many joys of both to offer. Then our conversation had wandered over our past adventures in heaven's realm. "Do you remember that angel in the Garden of Desire?" Janet asked at last. "The student angel? Yes, I liked him immensely. He showed us his books, and you said you would like to write a story of the Father's love to man." "Yes, I know," I interrupted eagerly. "I've been thinking of that story, and of the volume with the blank pages waiting for us in the Garden of Desire. Think what a wonderful story it would be. Our angel said that heaven was fulfillment of the highest aspirations of everyone. Imagine the variety of states and planes and mansions." "It would be lovely to visit them and write down all we see," Janet mused. "Are you thinking with longing of that tour also?" I asked quickly. "It is positively calling me." Janet turned a glowing face to mine. "Oh, Bernard, let us begin. Let us start to plan right away." "Well," I said doubtfully, "we shall have to start in the low plains and work upward. How shall we find them?" We fell silent, thinking, and then Janet cried out delightedly, "I know, let us ask the angel to be our guide." "The student angel?" "No, he is busy studying. Besides, he teaches people who come to him there. I mean our own angel, who guided us on our last adventures. Our dear angel of the ruby gown." "Janet, that's a lovely idea." We were silent then, drawing our mental vows, and sending out strong thought toward our dear guide. At first there seemed to be no response. Then Janet said in a thrilled whisper, "He has heard," and I added, "and he is coming." Almost before we had finished speaking, a great light blazed on the far horizon. Eagerly we watched it. Soon a figure appeared with the radiance, walking rapidly over the sea. Then we saw the ruby gown. Quickly we rose up and hurried down to the shore, standing hand in hand as we had done so long ago when Rose had come to us. As he drew near, we saw that he was smiling, and when he at last clasped our shoulders in greetings, he said, "Children, I have been awaiting this invitation. Of course I will conduct you on your tour." 2. We begin our journey. Very soon we had left the plain between and were soaring upward through the void. After our recent experiences among the spheres, it seemed quite small. This, though, immediately made us smile, for in reality it is vast. But I think the strangeness of the glowing stars, the passing chariots of angels, and the exalted nature of some of the sphere explains it. As we moved rapidly through the blue light, we began to ply our guide with questions. Where would we go first, or which was the lowest plane of all? But here our angel was unexpectedly firm, saying that, although he would certainly take us to the lowest planes first, it would be impossible to grade them, and to say which was the lowest of all. "Why is that?" I asked, and Janet added, "I thought you knew everything." Our teacher laughed deeply at this. "It is impossible to grade men in that mechanical way, because of their motives. A man may seem to be on a very low plane, or even on a higher one, and yet his motives, or the inner cause for all his actions on earth, alter the position entirely. Yet people must be classed together because of their expectations and interests. For instance, those who are musical will inevitably draw together, and vet each other may be at every stage of the progress. Nevertheless, this stage will determine the nature of their heaven, for they will see only what they are able to see of which is around them." "I think I understand," Janet said musingly. "It is not something like the illustration you gave us in the Place of Vision?" I asked. "You said that a baby could be taken to visit a museum on earth, yet receive the haziest of impressions, although everything was open before him. A person more advanced in years, however, would understand much more of what he saw. Good. I am glad that you remember that, said our teacher. See how valuable mind pictures are in the task of teaching. Yes, the simile of the baby in a museum exactly describes it. Wherever men congregate together on the other side of death, there are the babes, the children, and the adults, all mingling, despite the shared interests. Each plane, each hall, each circle, each sphere, remember, is a school having every class of pupil. It's all very clear now, Janet said gratefully, and we will not be foolish enough to ask again to be shown the lowest of all. Just take us where you will, dear angel. Our guide smiled at us affectionately. We three had formed quite a close friendship, and exalted as he was, felt very much at home with him. I could not help smiling at this, when I reflected how astonished many people on earth would be at the prospect of making friends with an angel. I think it will be good if we visit the wells first of all, suggested our guide. Here you will see the temporary home of those who have been heavy drinkers on earth. It will be most instructive. Is it possible that they can be finding fulfilment? I asked in great surprise. Somehow I thought of such people as being very unhappy because they could find no drink. Wells do not sound exactly stimulating, Janet ventured. Perhaps not, our angel agreed. Nevertheless, you will find there is a fulfilment for them. Do not think they have no time of difficulty or trial. Of necessity they must pass through this. But remember, you are seeking to discover how heaven is fulfilment. Therefore you will look for the end of the first chapter, rather than the beginning of their story. Now here we are, he finished abruptly, and do not be surprised at anything. 3. The shopkeeper. Janet and I found ourselves walking across a field beside our guide. It looked quite ordinary, like any field on earth, and so we did not pause, but followed a narrow path which led between trees at the far end. This, we discovered, took us into a winding street. I was immediately reminded of high streets of little country towns on earth. It wound its way steeply upward, and in the distance I caught a glimpse of more fields, and some trees swaying darkly against the sky. On either side of the street were buildings which looked like small shops. Janet turned a questioning glance at our angel, and he nodded. Yes, these are shops. But what do they sell? I asked. Oh, not the drink of earth, laughed our guide. They sell many things. Do they have money? Janet asked wonderingly. Yes, but not coins. Here money is service given. Thus, if someone receives a service from another, they are in debt to that one, and must sell them something in return. It may be something they have made, or that they have received in payment from another. It may not be a thing at all, but some service they can render. Can we look into the shops? Janet asked. It seems so strange that they should want to buy things here, when all things are free according to the Father's love. Yes, but they do not know that yet, our teacher reminded us. Remember, I said, do not be surprised at anything. As he finished speaking, one of the shop doors opened, and a man came out. His appearance at first amused me, and I swiftly searched his mind to find the reason for his strange attire. He was dressed in an assortment of full tunics of many different hues, and I discovered that on earth he had been very poor and had loved colours. These two desires were being fulfilled for him now, and those around him admired his choice as much as he did. You see, murmured our angel, if they did not, life could not be happy. So he has found a home among those who think he does. The man approached us with a beaming smile. Do come in, he said eagerly. I have some fruit juice that will please you. He laid a hand on my arm with a pleading gesture, and after a glance at our guide, we followed him within. Here he had arranged his bottles and shelves, and I was immediately struck with his blending of their colours. He had placed the deep red liquids on the lowest shelves all around the shop, the lighter ones on the next, and so on, until he reached the top where the colourless liquids were. I can mix the juices, he said proudly, or serve them plain. Just give us 3 glasses of pineapple juice, I suggested. 3? He glanced up in a puzzled way and then began to laugh. Oh, I grow tired of my own concoctions. Thank you all the same. 2 then. No, I began, and then stopped at a warning glance from our angel. He cannot see me, he murmured. No one can on this plane. I stared at him in astonishment. He looked so tall and solid standing there beside us. "Two then," I echoed, and the man turned to fill the glasses. When we had finished, I began to think of payment, but I did not know how to word my question. The man, however, soon solved this difficulty by leaning over the counter confidently. "I could do with some more glasses, if you cared to pay me in those." Janet and I exchanged a doubtful glance. Our angel refused to meet our eyes, but left us to deal with the situation alone. "We have no glasses," Janet began. "Then what about some polishing cloths? Or what do you have to offer?" "Nothing," I admitted. "Nothing?" The man looked amazed, then recovered himself quickly. "You must be newcomers, so of course you have not learned anything yet. Here in heaven we give something in return." "I know," he cried joyfully. "I can show you a little of heaven if you like. When I have closed my shop, I like to take a walk. Will you come with me?" "Gladly," Janet said warmly. He began to hustle about, putting things in order, and while we waited, our teacher murmured in our ears, "He takes you for newcomers who are fresh from earth. See then that you do not judge without knowledge, thinking a man below you when he does not appear familiar with your habits. He may be far above you." "We will remember," Janet whispered. 4. At the well. Presently our new friend closed his shop door and we set off up the street. He walked between us, eager to show us everything. The angel followed a little way behind. It seemed strange that nobody noticed him as we passed. Some of the people were standing at their shop doors, and they all greeted us warmly. We took the opportunity to peep into some of the windows. All the shops were beautifully kept. Our teacher pressed into our minds that this was because it was their heart's desire. We caught a glimpse of stocks of housing things, crockery, furniture, and the like. There were also bales of cloth and many things for sport and pastimes. "Do not think you will be bored here," said the little shopkeeper. "At first it was very strange, but wait until you discover the homeliness." "Have you been here long?" Janet asked. He turned a bright face towards her. "I came last Wednesday week." At this we felt quite a shock of surprise. I glanced back at my angel and he murmured, "They like to keep their days and nights. It gives them a sense of security." Actually, this little brother has been here for very long. Whole lifetimes have been lived on earth since he passed through death's door. Slowly we passed up the street and came on an avenue of trees. This led to a grassy field, very smooth and green, and our new friend went at once to a shady spot fringed with flowering bushes. "This is the first well." He sat down on the stone wall of it, inviting us to do the same. I would have made room for the angel, but he signed to me, and then sat on the grass facing us. "Since you said this was the first well," Janet said, "are there many here?" The little man shifted his position so that he could see the flowing skirts of his coloured tunics against the white stone. "They're all over the place." He spoke with such evident pride and satisfaction that I put in quickly, "Tell us all about them." "They are wonderful," he began earnestly. "When I first came here I was very troubled. I had been fond of the drink on earth, you see. I knew quite well it was wrong, because my poor wife never had enough money for the kiddies' clothes, let alone her own. Then, although it used to make me feel grand at the time, I was ill afterwards, lost my job too. I used to serve in a shop down there, and how I longed for a business again. At first I was going to save, but this liking for drink got hold of me, so you see why I was so scared to find myself here." "Tell us," Janet said quietly and quickly. "Well, I knew that if I had been wrong to drink so much down there, they would not let me do it up here. I knew how it had weakened me. Trying to do without it from time to time, it seemed like being in hell." "Was it, old fellow?" I asked. "Well, it need not have been. There is a man here who runs the town, sort of chief, you know. We call him a mayor. He came to meet me and told me everything would be all right, but I wouldn't believe him. I was just plain scared, I guess. I went away on my own and just wandered about, trying to find a shop where there was some drink. All they had was fruit juice. It was awful." His face shadowed and he grew thoughtful, so I said, hoping to dispel his sadness, "Then what happened?" "Well, one day I saw a man I had known on earth walking up the street. We had been great friends, and he had been a very heavy drinker too. It was heaven to see him. He was walking fast, with great swinging strides as though he was in fine health. I just ran as hard as I could to catch him up. Of course, he was overjoyed to see me, but he seemed surprised that I looked so miserable. "What's the matter with you?" he asked. "Don't you know this is heaven?" "What is the good of that?" I said angrily. "When you can't get a drink, I feel awful already." "But you can get a drink," he cried. Then I felt so happy, I just did not know what to do. I laid hold of his arms and began to tremble. "Quick," I whispered, "take me there." Without another word, he took me through the avenue of trees to this well, and as I saw him beginning to pull the bucket up, I began to get angry again. "It's water," I cried. "How could you be so cruel?" He just stood there smiling at me. "Do I look as though I have been drinking water?" Well, that sobered me. I took the cup without a word and began to drink. It looked like water, but oh, the difference! It was like fire running through my blood, stimulating and strengthening me. From that moment I began to live again. I went to find the mayor, told him all about myself. Very soon I had my own little shop. But, and here comes a surprise, this morning the mayor was here by the well when I arrived. He told me that it is water. He seemed to be expecting a comment, so I said, "Really? How's that?" He said it's charged with prayer power. Of course that is beyond me. He might be talking Greek. All I know is that the water does for me all the drink ever did, and more. "Did he tell you anything else?" Janet said. "Yes, he said that men on earth do not drink because of the taste. Many do not like it, and it often makes them sick. He said they like it because it seems to make their dreams come true. Now, isn't that surprising?" It certainly is. I was leaning forward now, listening with quiet interest. He explained to me that men drink to forget they are tired or worried or ill, or to make them feel good. When I asked why they felt good, he said it was because they had a feeling of power. Now let me recall his actual words. Oh yes, forget their limitations and get a glimpse of their hidden talents. Now that is very interesting. I stood up and leant on the stone wall. Did the mayor say how they helped to feel good here? "Yes," he cried eagerly, "and I have experienced it too. We are encouraged to use our hidden talents, and in using them to forget our limitations entirely. Having a shop has done that for me. Then there are all kinds of things for people to do. Some of them do handicrafts which others buy, make furniture, build homes and the like. Some of the women make dresses and tunics." He looked down proudly at his own. "Then there are all kinds of sports. Oh yes, glorious! I had no idea heaven would be so grand as this." We remained talking for some time after that, and were introduced to some of the happy people there. Then we rose to go, wishing the little shopkeeper a cordial farewell. "We shall meet again soon," he insisted. "Whether you keep a shop or go in for handicrafts, we are sure to come across each other. Heaven is a smaller place than I thought it would be. Well, just in case we do not meet, I wish you eternal happiness." "I too," Janet said, shaking his hand. Our angel rose up then and stood beside us while we watched the little man out of sight. Just as he reached the trees, he turned and cheerily waved his hand. 5. Thoughts. "What an experience that was," Janet exclaimed as we walked back through the woods beyond the well. "It amazed me to see how sure the little shopkeeper was that heaven he sees and lives in is all," I mused. The angel gave me a swift glance, grave and searching. "Do you begin to realise now," he asked, "that heaven cannot be wholly seen, that indeed it comprises many mansions? That is what heaven is to you. It's certainly far from heavenly to another." "I think we do." Janet answered for both. "Of course, we discovered in the place of vision that even in the same place people may see it in an entirely different way. That helps the realisation too. That is because people in two different planes may inhabit temporarily one place," said our teacher. "It seems to me that heaven is very much what we make it, just as we used to say of earth life," I commented. "How true that is." Our angel seemed pleased that we had understood so well. "It is more true of heaven than of earth. People so often live their earth lives in blissful expectation of heaven, thinking that it does not matter much how they live in their thoughts, provided they commit no outward sin. When they pass through death's door, they find that it is their thought life that determines the mansion in which they can live. It is not that other mansions are closed to them, but just that they cannot see or appreciate them. That is why the little brother thought that heaven was keeping of shops. It is so to him, But when he grows in thought, he will come to suspect the existence of a wider heaven world. Then he will rise up in search of it. Truly a man builds his heaven by the quality of his own thoughts on earth. That is why the great Paul taught of the value of right thinking, I said, and quoted, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things." Yes, our teacher agreed. Yet how few really apply these admonitions to themselves. They think because they have accepted Christ that they are sure of heaven. They do not say in their heart, "Yes, but what part of heaven? What mansion? Shall I be asked to go up higher, or shall I be moved down to make room for another guest at the eternal feast?" If they would but ask themselves that question, then begin to watch their thoughts, how much higher they would climb towards the Father's bliss when they had passed through death's door. Talking thus, we had passed through the wood, and now we came to a mountainous country. We stood on a hill, looking down into a tree-clothed valley where glimpses of water reflected the light. Beyond, the mountains climbed into the sky, receding mistily into a veil of cloud. "This is beautiful," Janet exclaimed, pausing to breathe deeply of the delicious air. "It's characteristic of this particular mansion," our teacher explained. We set off into the valley. This time we did not ply our dear angel with questions, for we felt that he wished to surprise us. However, we kept our eyes very wide open, and if it were possible, they opened wider than ever when we came out of some trees and onto a wide plain. There were men hauling great stones up a mountainside. All around was a great activity. Everyone seemed to be hurrying to and fro, carrying enormous weights, rolling boulders, climbing steep rocks to gather plants, or labouring to help young children over rocky places, bridging the river. No one seemed to notice us, and although we stood watching quite a long time, the work never ceased. "There is something rather grand about this," I mused. "I know," Janet answered, "yet I cannot quite grasp it." "It is the joy of accomplishment," our teacher said quietly, standing between us and following the toiling figures with his glance. "These people are all abundantly happy, for—" He broke off smiling. "We will let our friend tell you himself." "Where is he?" Janet asked. "He is one of those on the nearest mountain. We will go to meet him as he descends." 6. Over the mountains. We walked across the plain, treading our way among the hurrying figures. Although they seemed so intent on their tasks, all their faces were happy. Some of them gave us a brief smile as they passed. The children were running about everywhere. Most of them were playing or exploring the hills and woods, but some were helping their elders and evidently enjoying it immensely. A few of the youngsters were picking flowers. Of course they wanted some well out of reach. A woman was passing, understood at once. She climbed up, picked the blossoms and threw them down to meet their outstretched hands. "They have time to play with the children then?" Janet said approvingly. "Of course." Our angel almost looked shocked. "That is part of their life." We reached over the bank and followed it until we came to some stepping stones, over which we soon crossed. Another walk brought us to the foot of a mountain. It was clothed in heather and filled us with delight. "How lovely it all is," Janet breathed, gazing around at the entrancing scene. "The Father's love is everywhere," the angel said solemnly. A small group of men were coming down towards us as we halted to watch them. They were dragging behind them a trolley attached to a couple of stout ropes. Their faces were flushed with effort, but they were calling gaily to each other on the way. As they reached us, all the men passed except one. He came to stand beside us, brushing his hair back from a moist brow and smiling. He was a young, fine-looking fellow, scantily clothed. His shoulders had that massive quality which proclaimed great strength, his chest broad, his limbs lean and muscular. "Anything you want hauled up the mountain?" he asked laughingly. "No, not even ourselves," I replied, and Janet said, "We would like you to guide us, just the same, and tell us about your life here." "Oh, are you just come?" Then I will guide you gladly. I say, isn't it great to be here? It is indeed. Our angel had fallen back a step, and we walked on either side of our new friend. My name is Frank, he volunteered. What's yours? We told him, and then I asked, are you as happy here as you look? I am. His eyes lit up joyously, then shadowed. He seemed to fall into a deep thought as we went swinging up on the mountain. At last he murmured, after that other place. Want to talk about it? I asked, or would you prefer not? Why, surely you've just come from there, he queried in surprise, and then apparently remembering, no, the master said that there were other places too. The master? Janet cried. Have you seen him recently? I saw what was in Janet's mind, and I shared the thought with her for a moment. However, Frank's answer soon dispelled it. Of course I have seen him. We can see him about anything or nothing all day if we like. We call him the master because what he says goes, you know? So the master said there were other places too? Yes, over that range of mountains. He waved a hand vaguely. You must have come from one of them. Hope it was not as bad as mine. Was it very bad? Janet asked gently. It was awful. He stood looking out over the plain far below us, then turning, said suddenly, it was full of all the most horrid people, and the most horrid of all was me. I looked up quickly to find him smiling, and Janet said, well, you seem to be happy enough here, and not at all horrid either. Oh, here, that's different. Anybody can be happy and good here, but there, shall I tell you about it? Yes, if you would like to. I would. Somehow it makes me happier than ever when I look back in contrast. Well, on earth I lived with my parents and a young brother. We were not very well off, and I had to start work early. While my brother was still at school, my father and mother died. That left me with a cottage, the small wage I earned, and a boy to keep. Well, I got to hate my brother. Oh, Janet said blankly. She looked down into the treetops far below. Her face was a little sad. I know it was awful, Frank went on, but he was such a tie. I could never go out on a weekend, only on other trips with any other fellows I met at work, and all spare cash went on clothing him. I suppose I forgot what I had been at his age. I used to be furious when he went climbing and came in with torn suits. Oh, I never let myself know I hated him. I used to call it bringing him up. But I just went on hating him all the same. Hating him being with me. Hating having to feed him. In the end, hating everything he did or said or looked even. Sometimes I would lash out at him with my fist and he would whimper. I would feel a sense of power then. Yes, I was a brute to him. He fell into a silence. We turned a corner in the winding mountain path and beheld a scene of breathtaking beauty. While we looked at it, Janet said, but you were sorry. Of course I was, Frank broke in, but I wouldn't say so. The boy grew up, and as soon as he could leave school, he left me and lived in at his work. I knew where he was, but I never went to him, apologised and asked him to come back. At first I liked living alone. Then I came to miss him. I missed the way he smiled when I came in and he had managed to get some treat for tea. He would look up all bright-faced and tell me how he had traded a fish for 10 marbles, or something like that. Then gradually I came to thinking things over and to see how beastly I'd been, poor kid. He had a right to some childhood, the same as I had had, but I never told him so. What a pity, I murmured. What happened then? Well, I had my chance and lost it. I was in an accident. It all happened so suddenly, or I would have sent for the boy at last. One moment I was working in the factory, and the next I was through death's door. At first everything seemed all right. It was mountain country, something like this, with houses and everybody busy with their own interests. There was no work to do unless you wanted to. But I got pretty busy pretty soon, and I just wanted to join up with one of the families there. Then I had a shock. They all treated me just as I had treated my young brother. If I wanted something to eat, they would give it grudgingly. The air was cold and I needed extra clothes. I trampled all over the place, asking, even pleading for some. They all laughed or chased me off, as though I had been a thief. Nobody would be friends. Even. I was desperate. I don't know how long I lived there. It seemed years. Then one day I was walking about. I saw a man who smiled at me. It was the first time I had seen anyone being kind. I just rushed over to him, crying like a kid. Very soon I had poured it all out to him, and he told him what a beastly people lived here and how cruelly indifferent they were. He just looked at me and said, "My son, they are all just like you." That gave me a jolt. I began to tell him that I was like that once, but not now, and he said that I was still like that, deep down, because I had not been humble enough to apologise to my brother. Of course I asked him what I could do, and he said I must go back and be humble. After a while, I accepted it all in that spirit. I would meet a man who would welcome me into his house. Then he would show me the way over the mountains and into a place of happiness. Janet and I had been so interested we had forgotten all about the view. We were watching Frank's face intently. "And then?" I prompted. "Well, I went around to every house after that. They all went on being unkind to me, and each time I tried to be humble, and I said a prayer for the happiness of my brother still on earth. Then one day, as I walked up a garden path, the door flew open, and a man came out smiling. 'I was expecting you,' he said. 'I am the guide here, and will escort you across the mountains.' And so I came here," Frank concluded. "I never knew at first that man was, though the man told me to be humble." Suddenly our angel stood behind us, murmuring into our ears. It was the Lord. 7. The shack. We were both surprised and delighted at this, for the apparent absence of the King of Love had grieved us. Our angel, however, made us understand that he is there in every place and in every mansion of heaven's realm. He said that always he is seen, too, although the inhabitants often mistake him for a leader or a wiser adviser among them. It was with light hearts, then, that we turned to Frank. "Now tell us about your happiness here," I suggested. His broad shoulders were outlined against the blue of the sky. He looked like a happy young giant, standing there on the mountain. He smilingly swung a hand upward. "Come and see for yourself." Turning swiftly, he leapt up the steep crag behind us. Janet followed, springing lightly from rock to rock. I glanced at the angel, and he signed me to go before him. As we went, Frank talked eagerly. "The Master said that heaven was the fulfilment of our hidden desires. That is not always what we think we want, for often men on earth think that they might think that they ought to think what they want." He broke off laughing. "Isn't that involved? But you do get my meaning." "Perfectly," Janet assured him. "Well," he continued, "some people think they ought to want to rest all the time, but deep down they know they want activity. Then some think they should go long to meet angels and sing psalms with them. But of course they just imagine that. Who would want to meet an angel really and truly? It's other people that people want to see, sort of homely and familiar." "Yes, I suppose so." Janet and I exchanged an amused glance. Then we looked at our angel. He was smiling, nodding his head as though to say, "These babes, they will come to know us one day, and then they will be amused too." "It was the hidden desire for activity that made me act as I did on earth," Frank went on, leaping up on the broad top of the crag. "I wanted to be free to explore the world, to take hard physical exercise, to enjoy sports. Of course it was wrong to act as I did. It was a sin. The Master explained that. But he said that that was the thing that floored me. Had I fought it and conquered, he said I would have been higher up in heaven, although of course I reached it in the end. If this isn't high, what is?" He stood laughing down at us, sweeping a hand towards the valley below. "You're happy anyway," Janet agreed. "Do you have all the exercise you want now?" "Yes, it's simply grand. Look over there." He pointed to a distant mountain, and we were surprised to see that it was snow-covered. Down its smooth slopes people were flying on skis, and on the lower hills they were laden with toboggans. As we paused, shouts and laughter floated up to us. "That is only one of our joys," Frank continued eagerly. "We have fields for playing all kinds of games, and then we make gardens. It's tough going, but some of the fellows like it. So we all help. That is one of the characteristics of heaven. We must love and serve and share the happiness of each other." "What do you like doing most of all?" I asked. "We are building," he cried. "Do you see my chums at the foot of the mountain where we met? We thought it would be grand to live up here, so we're building shacks, the one like that, gardening, planting flowers over there for us. And some of them are hewing the soil almost out of the rocks, Look, I wanted to surprise you. He led us swiftly round a tall rock and onto a plateau. Janet cried out in delight, and Frank stood beaming proudly. The little shacks were set on the sides of a square, each with a small garden in front. Some were not finished, but others were already for occupation, with flowers already climbing the walls. "Who hung the curtains?" Janet asked in surprise. "Some of the women here. They like doing it. They make clothes for us and for the children, or anything else that is wanted. Look, that is my shack." He pointed to a half-finished one, and we went forward to inspect it. It was solidly built of stone, and Janet, entering the doorway, thoroughly approved of the 2 airy rooms she found within. Frank was eager to show us everything, so we stayed quite a long time. At last he announced his intention of returning, telling us that he had promised to rejoin his chums. "The master wants us all on the green this evening too. He gives us lessons about loving our fellow men. You know, are you coming?" "Perhaps it would be better for us to continue on our way," I said, after a questioning glance at our angel. "Well then, I will say goodbye." We shook hands, then Janet thanking him warmly for guiding us. In a moment he had turned the corner of the rock, and we heard him leaping down the mountainside. 8. Heaven on earth. Our angel smiled at us. "Is it not good to see the eternal patience of heaven's realm?" "Oh, it is," Janet said fervently. "Each one is so happy, yet learning all the time." "And not hurried in any way," I commented. "It's just one vast scale of growing," the angel agreed. "Always remember the continuity of life. People on earth so often think of life where they are and life where they will be, beyond death's door, as entirely separate, as though it were composed of 2 rooms, like Frank's shack. Actually, it's one, and continuous. When people begin to awake in the spirit, they sometimes start to yearn and sigh for heaven. Foolish ones." "Are they?" I asked doubtfully, for I too had yearned and sighed on earth. "Of course, heaven is not a blissful place in the next room. It can begin, and does begin, with the first moment of conscious earth life." "Do tell us more fully," Janet cried eagerly. "It will comfort so many people to think that their loved ones on earth can find fulfilment here." "Well, fulfilment is only possible here," our teacher admitted, "but some of the great happiness of heaven is available to all who seek it, for it is there. It is necessary, first of all, clearly to see all life as one continuous living, whether on earth or beyond death's door. Once this is realized, a man begins to see that he has not to wait for heaven, but he can start living the heaven life right away." I was listening intently, watching our angel's face as it glowed in the light of the setting sun. We were sitting high up on the mountain top, and the vast stretches of country laid out at our feet seemed to illustrate the angel's words. Janet had moved close, holding a fold of the angel's robe and looking up. "What must he do?" she whispered. "Well now, the bliss of heaven is particularly experienced in 3 ways. The first, a conscious of universal charity amongst men. The second, a freedom from care. The third, the abiding presence of the Father's love." "He cannot find all that on earth, surely?" I asked urgently. "No, but man can make what he does not find." "Oh?" Janet and I exclaimed together. "Let us consider them one by one." Our angel was leaning forward with an absorbed expression, evidently enjoying the subject as much as we were. "It is certainly not true on earth that there is universal charity. However, a man may live in universal charity in his heart, and thus enter into consciousness of heaven's joy. It will come to him immediately if he straightway resolves to be charitable in his thoughts. How simple, familiar, almost stale that sounds. Those on earth have heard it 1,000 times. Let us, however, visualize it in action. Suppose a man awakes one morning with the thought, "I want to start living my heaven life now, so I will be charitable in all my thoughts from now on." He has probably been taught in the plane between during sleep. He rises and begins to dress, and soon impatient thoughts begin to enter his mind against another man. Immediately he enters into his mental conception of heaven, as though he met this man on the broad field of heaven's realm. He remembers that the first of joy's heaven is universal charity. At once all the stupid resentments melt away. Why, he thinks, if his ways annoy me, my ways must annoy him. That is the first step, for he begins to see himself with another's eyes. Suppose he wanted to speak against me, he continues. How many things he could say. Probably I should find some of them quite new. Maybe unconscious habit of mine that he dislikes, or some way in which I have unknowingly misjudged him. Musing, he begins to enter more deeply into his heaven consciousness. When I reach heaven, all that will have to go, he thinks at last. After all, there we shall all be just God's children. There all our sins will be forgiven us, only to the extent that we have forgiven others. Unconsciously he draws again on the wisdom that came to him in sleep. What about my own sins, faults and failings? Most of them have not been deliberate, just sudden little temptations and falls. I have meant well, perhaps he has meant well too, and yet I would hold it against him as though he set out deliberately to harm me. As he begins to prepare his morning meal, he thinks wonderingly of the absurdity of his former way of life. He sees that, while desiring to be in heaven, he has made no effort to bring the universal charity of it to earth. If I cannot enjoy it here, how can I hope to enjoy it there? He asks himself in a flash of insight. All this thought of wanting heaven has been nonsense. I just wanted to get my own way, to have eternal bliss, and to go on looking down on my fellow men. They did not deserve it. I did. Suddenly he laughs at himself. A good sign. From now on I will live a heaven on earth, he resolves. I will think with kindness and sympathy of others, knowing that I have just as many faults as they. When their ways annoy me, I will remember that very few people deliberately sin. Mostly it's just like it is with me. I have sudden falls, and so do they. Yes, I will make a ready excuse for them as I make for myself. In the majority of cases, so I shall have reached the real truth of the matter. By this time the man has finished his meal and set forth on his journey for the day, carrying his heaven conscious with him in his earth life. He is happy and at peace. No wonder, for to him it is heaven on earth. 9. Heart's Desire. When the angel finished speaking, Janet and I seemed to see life with new eyes. It does seem easy after all, I commented. Yes, but man will not find it so. The habits of years have to be overcome. The mind must be trained to dwell in charity. Then there are the other two aspects to be considered. Tell us of these two, Janet asked, leaning back against our teacher's arm and gazing out over the distant mountain peaks. Is it not difficult to be free from care on earth? Difficult, but not impossible, the master said. Be not anxious, I ventured. Yes, man has the teaching there as well as here. It needs practice, though, to live without anxiety. Men think that they must do everything, that they must win from the life the benefits they desire. Of course, effort is necessary. Man must use the talents, but their motive for using them is usually at fault. They want a larger house, perhaps, or the facility for travel. They want richer food or clothes. They want to have more than their neighbours. Therefore they build their strivings on a wrong foundation. God does not bless their efforts, and they are burdened with care. How can I be less anxious, they mourn, if all my anxious strivings fails to bring me my heart's desire? If they would but turn to the word, they would find the answer. Delight in the Lord, and he will give thee thy heart's desire. But suppose he doesn't, they would plead. What shall I do then to get to my heart's desire? You see, they want their own way, and not God's way. They have ignored the real desire of their inmost heart, which is always the same, to find rest and joy in God. And they spend their lives in agonized striving for some less worthy motive. Of course, they are burdened with care. Heaven on earth comes when a man yields his heart to the Father, desiring to live his way, wanting what he wills. Then things begin to move in a wonderful way. Not at first. There is a time to test himself first, but the reward follows quickly on the heels of it. If he continues to strive with a good motive, that of loving and serving his fellow man, his life will lose its burden of earthly care. There will be trials still, or he could not grow, but his burden of care will be rolled away. Do you remember what the apostle said about that? Yes, for it was my favourite text on earth, I cried. Janet smiled at me, remembering how many times I had quoted it. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. Any more? Our angel asked, smiling at Janet. You next. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. Good. And another? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, Janet quoted. That will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, I added. Now that brings us to the third aspect, said our angel teacher. For the mind cannot be stayed on God unless his presence is felt in the soul. He rose up then and spread his wings. At the same time he clasped our hands. Let us continue our journey, and we will talk as we go. In a moment we were winging our way over the mountains, skimming the snow-covered one and wheeling high above the valley. Just as life must be recognised as one continuous whole, so must the Spirit of God, he continued. God's life spirit is in all that lives and is never cut off or withdrawn. How could it be? Without him the universe would fall into fragments and live no more. Therefore, a spark of that great spirit is hidden in the soul of us all. Men have to live on earth, their inner spark hidden by the veils of earth sense, and strive toward knowing until they reach the consciousness of which the King of Love spoke. What did he say? Janet whispered. That they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us. It's a stupendous thought, I said. It leads to a consciousness of his bliss while still on earth. Think also of the words, Know ye not that your members are the temple of the Holy Ghost, who is in you, whom ye have from God, and ye are not your own? For ye are bought with a great price. Glorify and bear God in your body. How can man on earth achieve this consciousness? I asked. Only by thinking of it, our teacher said firmly. If he reads or meditates and seeks within himself, he will all at once come to a glimpse of it. Within him is a narrow path with many turnings. If he continues faithfully, he will at last turn a corner and find the truth revealed. But he must persevere. If he pauses and gives up the search, how can he be sure that the very next corner is not the last? Suppose he's a busy man, suggested Janet, and has little time for meditation. What then? He can read one simple text and carry it in his heart. Who has not a moment to turn the treasure over in his mind from time to time? Yes, he must persevere, and if he does, the consciousness will come to him as though the music of heaven were sounding in his heart. 10. The precious gift. Presently we alighted and began to walk across a field. A cool breeze wafted its way towards us, and Janet breathed deeply. How delicious, she cried. Sample it, Bernard, and tell me what fragrance it is. I did so. The perfume was exquisite. After several seconds of delight, I said I thought it was the scent of a rose, that large, deep red rose, Janet. I believe it is. What do you think, Angel? I do not think. I know, he said, smiling, but this is the garden of roses. What a lovely place you bring us to, Janet said gratefully. Everyone does not think so. Look. We followed his glance and beheld a young woman standing uncertainly on the fringe of a garden. The scenery was sufficiently beautiful to entrance anyone, for there were broad paths edged with shrubs, and in the borders a mass of roses everywhere of every hue. The visitor, however, did not seem to notice all this. She kept looking about her with quick, timid glances. She looks lonely and nervous, Janet said. May we speak to her, dear Angel? Before he could reply, a woman came into view, walking with graceful step up the broad garden path. She went straight towards the timid one, holding out her hands hospitably. Draw near, said your angel, quickly, and she will include you in her greeting. As we approached, the two were standing together. You are very welcome, child, said the deep voice of the older woman. What is your name? Constance, said the visitor. I am so glad to see you walking about. People don't just keep still and do nothing, do they? How do you pass the time? Child, said the woman, whose name I saw was Margaret. Of what are you afraid? Of eternity, Constance stammered. Of having time without end and nothing to do. It does sound rather grim, Margaret smiled. Well, foolish one, I dare say we can find you something to do. She linked her arm in her companion's and turned to us. Well, here are more visitors. Welcome, Janet and Bernard. I saw at once that she had reached out in thought for our names. She saw our angel too, for she gave a little bow, though she said nothing. The angel returned the bow, murmuring to us, "The guides on these lower planes are far advanced, but out of their great love for mankind they give their services here for a time." "Let us all go along together," Margaret suggested. We set off along the path, Constance keeping close to her new friend, our angel, as usual bringing up the rear. The garden was very lovely. Janet and I would have liked to have lingered, but as Margaret and Constance went on, we followed. All around us, people were working in the garden, bending absorbedly over the rich soil. "They have something to do, you see," Margaret pointed out. "Yes, but I do not care for gardening," Constance whispered. "What do you like to do?" "I used to play my violin for hours. Oh, how the time flew." Her face lost its timid look as she spoke, then shadowed. "But here, oh, what shall I do here?" "Play the violin, I suppose," Margaret said with a smile. "Can I? Is it? Oh, surely it cannot be." "Why not? But let me show you around." Constance was looking delighted now. At last she had eyes for the beauty around her. "What are those buildings?" she asked. I followed the direction of her glance and saw that the garden widened into a great avenue. On either side there were huge buildings with shallow steps approaching tall, massive doors. The curious thing about these buildings was that they had no roofs. "Those are the pastimes," Margaret explained. "See, there are people going in one of the doors. Shall we look within?" We went quickly towards the step and soon found ourselves just outside the door. I think I had been visualising a kind of funfair of earth, rows of tables with aisles at intervals or something like that. Certainly I had a surprise. There was a vast green, open to the sky, stretching far away into the distance. Here and there men and women were trampling along or standing in thoughtful attitudes. All at once the truth flashed upon me. They were playing golf. "How very extraordinary," Janet said, coming to a realisation at the same time. "There are many others," Margaret said. "Come and inspect some more." We began a tour of the avenue, then passing by some of the buildings or pausing at doors of others. In one of these, people were standing at benches, working away with great concentration. Others were using various kinds of machines. "Those are the handicraft workers," Margaret explained. In another building, people were sitting at desks, poring with obvious enjoyment over their books. Occasionally the turning of a page disturbed the silence, or someone would rise and go across to the great bookcase for another volume. "Those are the students." Again, Margaret led us to a building where a number of games were being played. One section was reserved for tennis, another for cricket, and so on. In one corner, a group of people were lost to the world in a game of cards. At these, for some reason I could not fathom, I stared in great wonder. "Cards in heaven?" I gasped. "You will see the wisdom of it presently," the angel promised. At last we came to a building which proclaimed itself, for an orchestra was sending forth its music through the open door. At once Constance gripped Margaret's arm pleadingly. "Oh, may I go inside, please?" "Of course, child." Like a flash, Constance was up the steps and within the great door. Margaret and the angel turned to each other then and renewed their greeting. "You are doing great work in helping these little ones to lose their fear of time," said our teacher. "How did you achieve that?" Janet asked. "And why are people afraid of time?" Margaret led us to a seat before replying. When we were settled, she said, "People on earth are intended to use games and hobbies as a relaxation. Most of them do. Some, however, come to live for their games, to come alive, as it were, only in the pursuit of them. These people are afraid of time. Perhaps they had great ambitions and they failed. Perhaps they had great sorrows and desired to blot out the memory of them. Or perhaps through physical handicaps they were prevented from living a more varied life. Whatever is the cause, these people feared time. They were perpetually trying to pass it, to hurry over the hours, yet inexorably another day would dawn. Then there is the opposite type who tries to save time. He constantly rushes here and there, striving to do everything a little faster than his neighbours, trying to save time, and then, with the leisure won, to concentrate some more energy into saving that. These types are alike in that they are afraid of being still, of being alone, of thinking, of realising that there is an eternity. That vast, endless quality terrifies them, so they use up every moment. Of course, when they get here, we have to teach them to relax, to show them that eternity is not a fearful, but a wondrous thing. How do you do it? I asked. Well, she smiled. You may think this is a little hard on them, perhaps, but it is the most effective. These pastimes are enclosed so that the doors can be shut at regular intervals, not all at the same time. We announce that the building is to be evacuated and closed. Some of the people think this is a splendid idea at first. It saves them from monotony and boredom. Then as they become absorbed in their play, they object to breaking it off at the leader's command. Something like sending a child off to bed before he's finished reading the chapter in his book, I chuckled. Yes, exactly the same, Margaret said. How do the people react to it? Janet asked. At first they obey willingly, later unwillingly, then one by one they come to the leaders. Cannot I have a little more time to finish my work? They plead. Of course, we answer. Why, you have all eternity. Then gradually truth dawns, and they smile. From that moment we teach them to value eternity, how to see it as a precious gift of the Father's love. Very soon they are asking how they can serve their fellow men, or inquiring if there are places besides this one that they know. They do not abandon their games altogether, do they? Janet asked. No, for a long time they return here whenever they will, as a relaxation from learning in other planes. But they are perfectly at peace, for they have come to value eternity. Our angel intervened then to say, See the wise provision of heaven. They have their fulfilment right from the very beginning, yet every moment is a time of learning. Behold the Father's love. 11. In the park. Presently we said goodbye to Margaret and began to walk slowly on, our angel between us. We soon left the pastimes behind us and came upon a park. Here and there were arbours where people were talking together. It reminded me of the place of vision, except for the absence of perambulators. Most of the people were robed in loose-fitting garments, the men looking somewhat Eastern in their flowing skirts. Where are we now? Janet asked. It is but a continuation of that which we have left, and a place you have visited before. Have we really been here? I questioned, looking around in surprise. We have travelled so much since we came to Heaven's realm that we may have forgotten this. No, it is just that you have not seen this particular park. It is part of the Hall of Friends. Janet and I cried out in delight at this. It was very pleasant to come upon a familiar place. However, we were puzzled. Janet glanced at me questioningly. I thought that the hall was on a higher plane, she said at last. So it is. The part you saw last time. But remember what I said about the babes mingling with all the others, said the angel. Here too, each one sees, learns and enjoys what he is ready to understand. Besides, the older ones help the babies. It is touching sometimes to see with what respect some of the newcomers regard their elders. Again, some who are more advanced can see us. Some of them even see the king when he visits the people here. Has he been here recently? Janet whispered. The angel's voice dropped to a tender note of love. He comes even now. See, the very blossoms bow their heads. We followed his glance. Sure enough, the borders were all filled with drooping flowers. It reminded me of a cornfield of earth when a strong wind blows over it. The young trees, too, bent their slender trunks. There was a hushed air of expectancy. At the angel's words, we had stopped walking, and now he drew us into the shadow of an arbour nearby. Some of the people were talking, walking about or playing games on the grass. Others seemed to sense the master's coming, for they drew near to a grove of drooping trees, whose branches interlaced to form a great shadowed roof. Then we saw him. He came quietly into the grove, walking amongst his little ones, smiling and lifting his hand in blessing on them all. It seemed strange that somewhere unaware I had an impulse to go out and stop their play, but the angel's hand restrained me. He understands. Was he not equally patient with you when you also failed to kneel at his approach? When was that? I asked in surprise. When he came to visit his little ones of earth. Do you know that he visits the streets and gardens and houses, walking unseen in his lower kingdom. Nearer he came, our beloved king. He was robed in white and seemed much as I had imagined him, when he called together his fishermen friends on earth. One by one, the awakening men and women came to kneel at his feet. One of them paused before him, with clasped hands, gazing up with rapture to meet his tender face. "He has been here so often," murmured our angel, "but she thinks it is the first time. Her eyes have opened since his last visit, you see." "May we go to him?" I whispered. "Not yet," said our teacher, again restraining us with his hand. "Presently, when he has blessed the little ones. But you may follow him. Come." As our king reached the end of the grove, we started at a little distance behind. How tall, how majestic he was, and how radiant the faces uplifted to his. Soon he turned into a large building, and when we too entered, we were surprised to find that it was a kitchen, where all kinds of foods were being prepared. There were long rolls, newly baked, which reminded me instantly of the bread stems in the plain between. There were fruity cakes giving out their fragrant steam, bowls of soup and great piles of fruit. Here and there upon the long table were tall jugs of fruit juice. The workers were obviously happy as they moved silently about. "What a joy this kitchen is to some of the newcomers," our teacher exclaimed. "They feel timid, perhaps, or strange, or lonely. When we bring them in here, the familiar scene dispels all of their fears." "What is the master doing?" as we watched him lift his hands. "He is blessing the food. That is one of the purposes of his visits. The little ones, eating of this prayer-charged food, grow almost unconsciously. Their eyes open too, so that first they can see us, and then they can see their king." Again some of the people continued their talk, for they could not see the figure in their midst. Some, however, knelt or sat in reverent silence. When the prayer ended, he turned to leave the building after a last look around him. We followed closely, swiftly. He led us once more into the park, and walking among the trees brought us to the seclusion of a shadowed arbour. Oh, the bliss of that moment! For as we entered, we saw his raiment glowing with rainbow hues, and blazing lights surrounding his head. Once more we heard the beloved voice of our king. "Janet, Bernard," our angel prostrated himself beside us. 12. The place of artists. "Now you are going to have a very interesting experience," said our angel guide as we rose steeply above the trees. "It's all interesting," Janet answered gratefully. "What a wonderful book we shall write in the garden of desire. How the hearts of men will burn within them because of the loving kindness of the Father. Because of his infinite wisdom too," I added. "Yes, that is what I want you to have engraved on your memory for eternity," our teacher explained. "That is the very fulfillment of man's hidden wishes on earth, and contains all his learning, his joy, and his purification in heaven. That is why men on earth should strive to search their own hearts and to root out all that is not pure." "Suppose they do not know?" Janet asked. "They do know, deep within. We angels often teach them while they sleep, calling to the highest that is in them. Besides, is it not taught them in the Holy Book? 'I am he which searcheth the reins and hearts, that I will give unto every one of you according to your works.' If they know that the Lord will presently search their hearts and reward them accordingly, is it not logical that they should search their own hearts, purifying every desire, that the reward also may be pure?" "Yes, it is," Janet and I agreed, and I added, "To say that heaven is fulfillment suggests at first that all is joy, but of course it depends on the secret wishes that have to be fulfilled." "The secret thoughts also," our teacher agreed. While we spoke together, we had been travelling swiftly, and now we alighted in a long grassy avenue whose trees stood like sentinels on either side. The first thing that struck me, as we began to walk, was the stately beauty of our surroundings. Between the trees we could see broad walks, edged with low shrubs, and a fountain sending up its sparkling spray. There were deep stone walls too, with here and there tall figures revealing the beauty of the perfect human form. Beside the avenue, a lake rippled there, and there were several swans gliding placidly. This was the most formal of any of the places we had visited. There was even a building within view, very like a house of earth. As we continued our way, we saw a number of people. They were young and had a lithe grace much in keeping with their surroundings. Some were standing thoughtfully beside one or another of the stone figures. Others were strolling along the paths or sitting in conversation on the low walls. Children were running about, playing games or picking flowers. Some were splashing one another in the lake. They were all of great beauty, some more lovely than any children we had yet seen, except for the baby angels. Some of the little ones were posing for a group of people who regarded them with the earnest abstraction of the artist, while a man sat playing a haunting air on a violin. In reply to my questioning look, the angel said, "This is the place of artists." "Painters?" Janet queried. "All kinds of artists. Those who are musical and those who dance." "Dance?" I cried in surprise. "Why not?" said our teacher, and then, receiving our thought, "Oh, I see that you think dancing has no permanence. Well, it has. Here. See those stone figures? When the lesson is learned, they will return to their dust. Yet all the while they are needed. They are as permanent as pictures, are they not?" "Yes," Janet said doubtfully. "But what do they have to do with dancing?" "They are the crystallized thoughts of dancers. True dancing is an expression of some lovely thought picture or inspiration. The dancer on earth is handicapped by not being able to see himself while he expresses his thought. True, he has mirrors, but these give only flat, fleeting glimpses. Here, at any moment he chooses, he may, by an effort of will, crystallize his thought. When his dance is ended, he has the figure of himself in action for the purpose of study." "What a wonderful provision," I explained. "Truly, the vast resource of heaven seems to be without end. Do they not spring from the infinite? Musicians, too, are able to crystallize their lovely mind pictures." "Where are they?" Janet asked. The angel smiled. "Before your eyes. See the avenue of trees, the fountain, the house yonder. All are expressions of the musician's thoughts and the painter's." "Do you mean they created them?" I asked, remembering our lessons in the Garden of Desire. "Then this must be a very high plane." "It is not the exalted nature of the plane which inspires creation. This is one of the lower planes. No, it is the creative force within the mind of all artists. This comes into its own here, so that the beauty of the thought can be seen and studied." "Do these surroundings also return to their dust?" "Yes." "Then what is left?" "The next mind picture." Our teacher smiled. We must have been looking puzzled, for he suddenly said, "Let us talk to one of the people here. Who shall that be? A painter, dancer, musician?" "A dancer," I put in quickly. "That is, of course, if Janet approves." "I should like that too," she agreed. We walked on through the beautiful avenue and presently came to a paved square where a girl was sitting in rapt contemplation of a statue. It represented a dancer in action, and I saw that the features were the same as her own. She rose at our approach and greeted us with a smile. "My name is Bernice." "This is Bernard and Janet," our angel said. She turned to us and then to him, and it was with joy that I realized he was visible here. "May I introduce my angel?" she asked surprisingly. "We shall be honoured," I answered. She turned towards the trees, and we saw an angel rise and come towards us. He was tall, graceful, and very fair. His flaxen hair bound round the forehead with a blue cord. His flowing robe was white, girded at the waist with blue. Silently he exchanged a bow with our angel, his eyes gleaming. Then, approaching us, he clasped us each on the shoulder, saying, "Greetings. Have you come for material for your book?" "How did you know?" Janet asked in astonishment. "We angels do know," was all he said to that, but his smile was tender. "We would so much like to know the part of the place of artists as in the Father's plan," I ventured. "Your teacher has already explained to you about the crystallized thought picture, I see," he replied, looking at us searchingly. "As to its part in the great plan, it must be understood that all artists with creative ability, those who make pictures, compose or play music, or dance or write, have a big responsibility during their life on earth. They have the power to express, you see, and so it is essential, if they are to give beauty and goodness to the world, that they have pure minds." The angel paused and silently invited us to sit down. When we had all found comfortable seats, I asked, Suppose an artist did not have a pure mind, but painted a beautiful picture. Would not that he giving beauty and the goodness to the world still be the same? No, there is more in it than that. The angel seemed pleased at my question, as though he had been expecting it. Every picture has a soul, you see. By this I mean a twin, more subtle in form and therefore invisible to earth eyes. However, this subtle form can be perceived by the souls of men, and they absorb into themselves something of its nature. Hence, if an artist with an impure mind, by impure I mean not wholly good, offers a picture to the world, its soul twin has upon it the impression of the ugliness of sin. He offers a beautiful picture for the eyes of men, but an ugly impression for the souls of men. It is these soul twins, whether of artists, musicians, dancers or writers, which are kept in the House of Records. What is that? Asked Janet, looking round for the house we had glimpsed on arrival. Oh, not that, said our new teacher. It is a place where the record of every soul picture is kept, but it is only visible at the will of the angels here. Those artists who come from earth must first view all of their record. Then they see deep impression of what their secret thoughts have made, for these have been vitalized by their creative power. That is what I meant by the responsibility of such a gift. There are many sad pictures for me to see on arrival, Bernice said. In my long life I sometimes forgot the noble quality of my art, and I used it basely. Did you say your long life? Janet asked. You're only a girl. I was 90 years old when I passed through death's door, she smiled. Here, according to the loving provision of the Father, we renew our youth. After I'd been shown how to help in washing away the ugly pictures, I was very happy. How is it done? I asked. By learning and practicing my art so that I may offer it to the service of my fellows. Later I shall have the honour of taking part in the lesson plays which are given in various parts of heaven's realm, but not yet. First I must wait until the ugliness I have left in the world has died quite away. Will that be long? Janet asked. Not long. These years pass swiftly, and soon all those I knew will have followed me through death's door. I am happy now. What would you like me to dance for you? Before we could reply, she must have known our answer. She leapt up, taking a position in the centre of the paved square. Instantly a rapt expression crept to her face. She took a deep breath and then began to move in a rippling, slow motion. To our delight we could see the soul picture as she danced, so that we could follow all the beautiful conceptions of her mind. She chose as her subject one of the scenes from a Bible play, which would later be performed for children. As she danced, some of the little ones left their games, joining in with graceful simplicity that entranced us. Those were little dancers of earth too, murmured our angel guide. These innocents, these little ones, they have the freedom of many planes and often visit here to dance with or pose for the artists. When the dance ended, we thanked Bernice and wished her goodbye. The last we saw of her was her still figure poised before the statue in exact imitation of its pose. It is thus I will end my dance before the crib, she said happily. Yes, I am chosen to take a small part in the greatest play of all. 13. Journey to the Stars. Now we are going on a long journey, said our angel guide. He put an arm around each of us, holding us to his sides, and began to soar upward above the garden. By the way he held us, we realised we were to travel on angel's power, and Janet asked, Are we to travel again in the higher void? Yes. Are you pleased? Oh, so pleased. The vast grandeur of the spheres was enough to please anyone, I commented. Which one is it to be? If I told you its true name, you would hear nothing, for it is too high for you. However, men call it the sphere of dreams. How intriguing, Janet cried. Do tell us about it. We had been cleaving upward so rapidly that we had long ago left the paved walks and gardens behind us. The higher void began to enfold us in its first twilight. I sighed with content. All men have dreams, our teacher began. Some of them are mere whims of the surface mind, but others spring from the hidden depths of the secret heart as pure water gushes out of the soil. It is these dreams, these cherished visions, which are fulfilled in the sphere to which we go. Are dreams and visions the same? I asked. In a way they are. As you know, within each soul dwells the divine spark, and man constantly seeks to reach it, once he awakens to his great destiny. Sometimes, by stilling his mental faculties for a moment, he comes very near to the adorable mystery within. Entranced, he seeks to understand it, to clothe it in something he can treasure, something he can visualize in his mind. He may clothe the mystery in the lovely body of a young child, and in an ecstasy may say, "I have seen the infant Jesus." His longing desires, you see, have inspired his search within. And when for an instant of time he drew near to the presence, they clothed the treasure according to his heart's dream. So you see, the dream is the seeking, and the vision is the finding. Are visions then something unreal? Janet asked. What is reality? Replied our teacher. Men say, this is real, this is unreal. But should they not reverse sometimes in their verdict? Truly the vision is real, in that the life within the form is the divinity within. The form may change as the desire of man's heart changes, but the life remains. Suppose a mother proposes to take a child on a visit. She wants her host to see the boy at his best. Carefully she selects some clothes and begins to put them on him, first one suit and then another, pausing to observe the effect. Now when she clothes him in her final choice, she does not say, "He is my son. It was not my son in these other clothes, but an illusion." Of course, she knows her child, however he is clothed. Thus it is with visions which spring from the depths of a devout soul. In life he is the same, but he is clothed in dreams. How lovely that is, Janet breathed, and I added, sometimes we have wondered, when people have had a great devotion to the holy childhood, how it could be. It seems strange when long, long since he was grown to manhood, died and ascended to the Father. You thought it lacked reality, our angel said. How men of earth pride themselves on being practical, and knowing what is real and what is unreal as they grow. They learn that he alone is the true reality. During this conversation, we had been speeding forward all the time. The twilight had deepened into night, and the vast splendour lay around us. On every side stars flashed in their velvet setting, some far away, others seeming to be near. Now and then a chariot of angels sped by, bearing some great one to a height beyond our knowing. Once a planet hung poised within our range of vision, looking like a spinning ball just out of reach, but our angel soon dispelled the idea. It is one of the greatest of all, he explained. If you had begun to travel toward it when you first left Earth, before even you entered the hall of reception of Heaven's realm, you would not have reached it yet. He smiled at our astonishment. Presently he told us to look up, and we saw a tiny point of mellow light shining. That is our destination. 14. Sphere of Dreams. When we reached the sphere, our angel released us, and we walked together through a wood. It was very peaceful there, and we did not speak, for there was much to ponder over and to see. The revelation of our teacher concerning visions had made me feel humble, for I had indeed, while on earth, thought them to be moving pictures of the mind. Not that I had scorned them, for many times I too had been lifted up on a joy of vision sea, and had floated contentedly out beyond the world's shore. All the same, I had not understood, and I resolved not to make this mistake again. As we continued our way, birds flew down to welcome us. Some of them alighted on our shoulders, or leaned from drooping boughs to blink at us. They were entirely fearless, allowing us to ruffle their feathers or to lift the babies into our arms. Some of them were of the kind we had frequently seen on earth, but others were of the most brilliant hues. There was little pause in the joyous song they sent echoing through the branches, and my own heart lifted in praise to join them. Butterflies, too, were in great variety. Some of them alighted on our heads or rested near the path, splashing the brown branches with their flaming wings. "This is the most delightful place," Janet murmured at last. "Is it not the sphere of dreams? See," our angel went on, "we come to the bower. Tread softly, for she who dwells here is the queen." There was little need for the warning, for our steps ceased utterly at the sight that met our eyes. Just off the woodland path was a clearing, and here loving hands had trained the leaping foliage into ordered beauty. Down the centre was a broad path, arched overhead and covered with climbing flowers. Some of the blossoms peeped down at us, sending out their haunting incense. On either side were borders, massed high with plants and flowering shrubs. Right at the end of the path, half hidden in drooping leaves, was the bower. After an involuntary pause, the angel led the way. We followed softly and saw there was a movement in the dark interior, and a woman appeared. At the sight of us she paused, smiling radiantly. She had a look about her which I cannot describe, except to say that her eyes held a kind of startled wonder. She was robed in a flowing gown of leaf gold, with veils of the same material on her head. "So you have come," she said, as though she had been expecting us for a long time. In that fleeting moment, I deepened my sight, as I had been taught in the place of vision, and then I saw that this woman had been unlettered while she lived on earth. A needlewoman, she had worked hard while her fingers had grown gnarled and bent. As the years drew on, she had dreamed, and her dreams had been of all the holy little one, and very dear. "Will you come within?" she invited. Our angel bowed a grave assent and motioned us to follow. Slowly, softly, we entered the bower. It was dark within, so that at first we could see nothing, but gradually our eyes grew accustomed, and we saw that the floor was carpeted with moss. The walls were clothed with creepers, starred with tiny white flowers. We saw that our angel was moving and made to follow, and then we almost gasped as he fell upon his knees, his head bent low, his hands were lifted up, set palm to palm. His wings were folded. He was very still. "Janet," I whispered urgently, my heart beginning to beat rapidly. "What can it be?" She reached out and clasped my hand. It was cool and steady. Glancing at her face, I saw it was lit by the same expression of startled wonder. She was leaning forward, smiling tenderly at some object against the wall. "Come," she whispered, and then I saw it was a manger. Silently we knelt beside our angel, bowing low. The woman, too, had knelt on the other side. I did not dare look up. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed to fill the bower with its thudding, but in between I heard little movements. Suddenly the woman's tender voice began in a kind of murmurous chant. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered, and she brought forth her just-born son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for him in the inn. Her voice trailed away, for all at once the bower was filled with baby angels. They came dancing in, carrying flowers and chanting, "Glory to God in the highest." They did not cease their song until they were gathered around the manger. Then, in the breathless pause, a tiny hand touched mine. I looked up to meet the wide gaze of the babe. How my heart leapt within me! The woman lifted him tenderly, holding him to her heart. The light that streamed from the little bundle illuminated all the bower, and I caught a glimpse of Janet's enraptured face. "Would you like to hold him?" One by one the angels crept away as we each knelt to hold the infant in our arms. In that moment of surging joy, I entered into the spirit of Simon, who cried, "Now lettest thy servant depart in peace." While Janet held the babe, I heard her quickening breathing and caught the echo of her heart song. The bower was very still. Presently the woman carried the babe to the doorway and held him up to see the garden. "I tended always for his delight," she whispered. "When the morning dew is on the grass, and in the cool of the evening, I carry him down the path, and every now and then we stop to admire a particular blossom. It seems even more beautiful after his touch." "What do you do between the morning and the evening?" Janet asked, holding her finger to be clasped in his dimpled fist. "Then the shepherds come," she answered. "The wise men and the kings. Oh, not really," she hastened to add. "Just those who love him come and kneel beside the manger. On earth the shepherds and the wise men were part of my dreams. I also longed to behold the holy babe, just once when I came to heaven, but I never dreamed of this." Tenderly she carried the babe within and laid him in the manger. Once more we knelt, for our angel was still there, motionless against the vine-clothed wall. As we bent over him, our faces were lit by his radiance. Later, as we walked on through the wood, Janet turned to our angel. "You said once that no one stands still in heaven's realm. How long does she stay in the bower then? And is she not sad at the thought that one day she must leave it? Child, said our dear teacher tenderly, every moment she remains in worship of the Holy Babe, she grows in wisdom, and one day Spirit within her will lead her on. The little babe will beckon, and she will follow until she too reaches the heights in the fullness of time, even as you will. 15. Pedro. Presently we came to a garden set close to the sea. There were not so many flowers in this, but mostly flowering shrubs, with shady trees leading over broad lawns. These lawns sloped gently down to the beach. On the other side of the garden, a path led through trees and onto a rolling moorland. Far away, we saw its purple-clad summit, topped with a rock, standing darkly against the sky. As soon as we approached this garden, we began to look about expectantly, and our angel said, "Look, there is Pedro. He is the one we wish to see this time." He indicated a boy sitting beneath a tree. He had one knee drawn up, with his elbow on it, and his chin rested on his hand. He was dressed in a robe of brown, coming about halfway between knee and ankle, and girded at the waist with a cord. He was gazing thoughtfully out to sea, and did not hear us approach. But as we drew near, he glanced up. Instantly he was on his feet, bowing deferentially to our angel and clasping us each on the shoulder. "Is he with you?" the angel asked. "Yes," said the boy, with a quiet exultation in his voice. "He is sleeping. We will not wake him. Will you sit down and wait with me?" "Gladly." We all found comfortable seats under the trees, and Janet asked, "Did you have a dream on earth too?" The boy turned to her with a kindling in his eyes. He appeared to be about 12. His eyes were very dark, his colour fresh. His curling hair was of the same hue as his robe. I had many dreams. They all seemed to mingle, though, so that they became as one, lasting for 5 years. "What a long time," I commented. "Shall I tell you about it?" Pedro asked, seeing our eager looks. "Well, I'd always wanted to be a priest or even a monk. I wasn't sure. I thought about it a lot, and my parents were pleased too. Then one day, when I was about 12, I fell and hurt my back. At first I thought I should soon be well. All day I used to lie so that I could see out of the window. I could not see the ground, but that didn't matter, for the tops of the trees were there. I used to watch the birds flying to and fro, bringing twigs to make their nest, for it was spring. My back did not mend as quickly as I thought it would. My parents were very kind, bought me all kinds of books to read, and other boys to see me. Most of all, however, I liked to watch the birds. I saw the mother birds sitting on their eggs quite close, and then the babies with their wide open mouths. I watched them grow and learn to fly too. As they fluttered away, I would think, "Soon I too shall be able to move about, even as they." The time went on until I thought I knew many of my birds by sight. Then one day I saw them bringing twigs, and I knew it was spring again. I cannot tell you all that meant to me. Despite the date, I had not realized that I had been lying helpless for a whole year. It gave me a kind of dreadful shock. Frantically I called for my father. I did not dare ask my mother, for I thought she would try to veil the truth from me. When he came, I just looked right into his eyes and I said, "Father, am I incurable?" I think he knew by my face that I had guessed. As soon as he entered the room, for he did not attempt to evade it, he just looked back at me and said, "Yes, my son." I didn't say anything then, but just turned my face to the window so he would not see the tears on my lashes. He must have known how I felt, for presently he went away, closing the door quietly. Then I let the tears flow. Never to run again, or walk, or climb, or play, never to go to college and learn to be a priest, or a monk, or both. Just lie here, always. Long afterwards I fell into an exhausted sleep, and then it was that I had my first dream. He paused, looking out onto the far horizon. No one moved or spoke. "In my dream, the door of my room opened," he said presently. "I looked up, thinking my mother had come to comfort me. Instead, I saw a boy about my own age come and stand beside the bed. He had my colouring too, but his face was more pointed. He was dressed as I am now. I just lay there looking at him, wondering who this new visitor could be. Then he smiled, and I knew him. It was the boy Jesus. I stretched out my hand towards his as it lay on the coverlet, but I did not dare touch it. He understood. He lifted my hand and held it between his own. "Pedro," he said softly, "you wanted to give your life to me by becoming a holy priest. Have you taken that life away?" "It has been taken away from me," I mourned. "See, I have a useless back. Of what good is my life now?" "It is of use to me. Will you give it to me again, to be all mine, to do as I like with it?" I did not know what to say to that. It seemed so strange that this divine boy should want a life so useless and dull. Looking into his eyes, though, I began to think it did not much matter what he wanted it for. So I said, "Yes, Jesus." He smiled then and pressed my hand. "In life, everyone has trials," he went on. "Some are angry about them, and so they do not look to see if they can learn anything. The wise ones look at them, and inside them too, to see what they can teach. Will you be one of these wise ones?" By then, I would have agreed to anything he wanted. I just nodded, and he said, "You would have hard trials as a priest, and they would have fitted you for heaven. But I want you in heaven before that, Pedro, so your trials have come sooner. These trials can teach you 3 things. 1, to use your solitude in thinking of holy things. 2, to be patient in pain and weariness. 3, to forget your affliction in being interested in those about you. If you strive manfully, you will not really lose any of those years of play or of adventure or of movement. I shall treasure them all for you in heaven, my Pedro, and when you come to me, and it will not be so very long, I shall be your friend, your companion, your playmate. We will do all the things you have longed to do together." He left me then, and that ended my first dream. There was a silence, and then Janet asked breathlessly, "Did you strive, Pedro?" I tried to. Sometimes I would forget. I would look out of the window and see the blue sky, hear the shouts of my old school friends as they set off for long tramps over the hills. Then I grew angry at times and said something irritable to my patient mother or grieved my father, who was already so grieved for me. When I went to sleep after days like that, the boy Jesus came to me again. He looked so sad. He just came to stand beside me, saying, "Oh, Pedro." How sorry I used to be when I had told him. He would sit down on the bed and talk to me, telling me how glad he was when I overcame my faults, how grieved when I gave way. Gradually I grew stronger in spirit. He did not come every night, but every 3 or 4, and always he would talk to me of the treasure he was keeping for me in heaven. After a while, my parents used to ask me what had made me so patient or cheerful or brave. Then I would smile and turn the conversation, for I could not speak of the visits of the divine boy, and I would not grieve them by letting them know my days were numbered. 5 years went by in that way. By then I was 17, very tall and wasted and pale. At last they saw my strength was failing. We never spoke about it, but we understood each other. One night when the divine boy came to visit me, he was smiling more brightly than ever. He had a brown robe on his arm, just like his own, and he held it up to show me. "Rise up," he said, "and put this on. We are going on a journey together." "Jesus," I said, half laughing at the words, "how can I rise up who have been here for 5 long years?" "Rise," he repeated. He leant over me and lifted me up. Oh, the joy of it! I could scarcely restrain myself from dancing around the room, but he made me stand still while he clothed me in the brown robe and tied the girdle around my waist. To my amazement, I found that I was no taller than he was as we moved together across the room. How often I had seen him go from me towards that door. Now I walked with him. As we went out, I took one look at the bed which had been my prison and saw my wasted form upon it. 16. The Divine Boy. "Then you had died in your sleep?" I said during the pause which followed Pedro's last words. "Yes," he said. "Suddenly I was free. It was wonderful. Jesus and I went hand in hand, and I was too happy over my unaccustomed movements to notice the way, nor the length of our journey. All I know is that we came here." "You are very happy still?" Janet said softly. "More than ever. All the things I long to do, we do together. Sometimes we go down to the beach and walk far out over the sea. Sometimes I swim round in circles while he sits upon a rock. Then we go for long walks over the hills. I think of the times I heard my earth friends setting out and yearned to follow. Then I realise the depth of my joy, for here I have the divine boy for my companion. All the time he teaches me. Sometimes it's of high matters, when he prepares me for greater heights, for the days when I shall be a teacher. Other times he shows me how to increase the power of my sight so that I may look into a tiny blossom and learn all the secrets of the universe there. Yet side by side with the teacher is the boy. He laughs and runs with me and suggests all kinds of new adventures. "Have you been to the gates and seen your mystic robe?" I asked tentatively, for I'd been wondering about this for a long time. "Not in the way you have," Pedro answered. "Jesus taught me about that too, but he said I was shown the state of my soul and all my faults and sins while I was still on earth. He explained that those 5 years of trial were used as a preparation. Instead of doing my reparation here—" "Listen," he whispered, "I think he's awakening. Will you follow me?" With beating hearts we rose up. Pedro entered a narrow path between the trees, and stepping softly soon led us into a glade within the wood. In its centre, lying on a couch of leaves, was the boy. As Pedro had said, he was almost exactly his height and colouring, except for the darker lashes which flickered now on the sleep-flushed cheeks. As we came to a pause, he stirred and opened his eyes. I shall never forget that first glance from the clear eyes. He looked at each of us, then rising, said with boyish courtesy, "You are very welcome." Our angel was standing close by, looking intently at the divine boy. We did not know what to say. The situation was so new, yet so thrilling. "Pedro," he said, smiling, "tell your new friends not to be afraid." "Afraid?" Pedro laughed. "Ah, not of you, Jesus. How could anyone be afraid of you?" We turned then and met the boy's gaze, and in that moment something seemed to flow from him to us, an invisible cord linking our hearts to his, making him familiar to us again. "Jesus," I whispered, "my little king." Janet just knelt and looked up into his face. We stayed a long time in the glade. Pedro went to gather some blossoms, and the boy made us look at one while he expounded his mysteries to us. We were entranced with his wisdom. He read the little flowers as though they were great tomes of deep learning, and yet so simply and attractively did he speak that his words did not sound out of place on the lips of a boy. Pleasantly, Pedro began to look towards the hills which were just visible between the trees where we sat. At last he said, "Jesus, can we go for a walk now? You promised just before you fell asleep." The boy looked gravely upon him. "Pedro, our guests are with us." It was quietly spoken, but Pedro saw his error instantly. He flushed and turned quickly towards us. "How thoughtless of me. Please do forgive me. I do not really want you to go. It's just that after 5 years of lying still, it is wonderful to be able to move. Sometimes keeping still makes me forget I'm free. You do understand." He looked so beseechingly at us that we hastened to reassure him. Our angel too lifted up his hand in a swift sign of blessing. After a while, the boy rose and stood looking gravely upon us. There was a question in my heart, and yet I could not bring myself to ask it. Yet he understood. He just lifted his hands in blessing. We fell on our knees to receive it, then rising watched him pass out of the wood and on the path leading to the hills. The last we saw of him was on a slight rise in the ground. He was swinging along beside Pedro, his arm around the boy's shoulders. Their robes fluttered in the breeze. 17. The Great Teacher. As we walked on through the wood, we were very silent. Janet was smiling to herself, looking peaceful and calm, but I cast puzzled glances at our angel until he said, smiling, "Well?" Now the question I had wanted to ask the divine boy came tumbling out. How can he be a babe and a boy at the same time? Why not? I can understand that they saw him like that, according to their desires, but he talks and teaches them. You kneel to the babe as well as the boy. I broke off, thinking I had not made myself clear. Janet was smiling as though to say, "Oh, this Bernard. Who will try to understand with his mind, after all these heavenly lessons?" "Do you understand so well?" I asked her. "Of course," she said placidly. "I am so glad to see my Jesus that I do not stop to ask how or why. Why should I, since he is?" Why, indeed, I echoed, but... Ah, said our angel, there is a but, I see. Yes, I confessed, feeling somewhat small and humble, yet not so unpleasantly so, for it always gives me a keen joy to follow Janet lead and to learn from her serene faith. On earth, our teacher began, many people dream dreams and see visions, do they not? Yet because one man sees the Lord, does it mean that he is absent from all others at that moment? How could it be, since he is one with the Father, and since the universe would crumble into dust if he forsook it for an instant of time? Again, did he not say, this is my body and this is my blood, I am that living bread? Yet how many thousands kneel at altars all over the world at the same time? Did he not multiply the loaves and fishes, so that the food which was sufficient to satisfy one boy was made enough to feed thousands? If he appeared in one body cloak only, how could he satisfy the longing hearts of all? Think also that multitudes enjoy the sun's heat at one time, do they not? They do not say, this cannot be the sun because it is shining also on my brother. Millions of people look up at the moon. Though they are vast distances away from each other, they can all see it. Remember, Bernard, the illustration you came upon during your studies on earth, and which you found so helpful in many ways. You read that a man might hold up a piece of paper, and making 5 holes in it, thrust his fingers through. What do you see? He could ask his pupil, taking care that only the tips showed. I can see 5 fleshy objects. Are they separate, quite apart and distinct from one another? Yes. Then the teacher would remove the paper and reveal one hand. Those 5 fleshy objects appeared to be distinct and appeared to move separately, yet they were all the time one with the hand, and under its direction. The one power of the hand moved the 5 fingers, though each seemed separate and independent. Now, concluded our angel, if 4 fingers and a thumb, all different sizes in appearance, can be controlled by one human hand, yet retain their reality and individuality, can you not appreciate that a great spirit could project itself into many forms, that wisdom could flow through these forms from one spiritual mind, that the power could spring from one power, and the love from one love? He stopped speaking, and for a moment I was too amazed to speak. His illustrations had opened vistas of consciousness unknown to me before. At last I cried, "Oh, I am beginning to understand." And to Janet, "Did you know that?" "Of course not," she laughed. "It's all very wonderful, but quite unnecessary, really." "Unnecessary?" I echoed, and then I caught a sight of the angel's twinkling eyes. "You and Janet," he explained, "being 2 who walk together for eternity, have of necessity different aspects of thought. It is the eternal male and female, the mind thinking and the heart knowing. This is the real enduring male and female principle. This mind thinking and heart knowing must ever unite, so that at last perfect wisdom is born. It is a great mystery. It is indeed." I agreed with a feeling of awe. "Now," said our angel, "we have come to Trevor's study." I looked up eagerly at this. We had entered another glade in the wood. It was arched with interlaced boughs through which the light filtered, tinted with green. The carpet was of moss, and walls were the sturdy trunks of trees. Here and there flowers were springing up among the roots, and amid a colourful couch of them a young man was sitting. He was robed in dove grey, and he reminded us instantly of the student angel in the Garden of Desire, because he held a book upon his knee. He made to rise at our approach, but our guide restrained him with a gesture. "We will sit with you." After some introductions, I looked into Trevor's glowing brown eyes. "Is it study that makes you so happy?" "Yes, and my teacher." At these words, Janet cried out in delight. "Does the master teach you? What a wonderful privilege!" "It is. Every evening he comes to me as I sit here with my books. In the daytime I receive those who desire to learn, and I pass on my knowledge to them." "Could they not come and hear him too?" "Yes, if they were ready. But he expounds deep mysteries. I give each of my pupils as much as they can understand." I had been looking round his study with great interest, and at last I asked, "Where is your library?" He smiled then, indicating the book on his knees. "Here." "Just that one book?" I queried in surprise. "What is it?" "Can you not guess? It is the Holy Bible. When I was on earth, I used to read it every night. Sometimes I was so tired after my long day in the fields, for I am a farm worker, that I could only read a few verses. Other times I would pore over pages until the candle burnt out. Then I would lie down thinking, oh, if I had someone to teach me what it means. Was there no church? Janet asked. No, for the farm was so isolated, hundreds of miles away from the smallest village. Sometimes when I had to go into the town to arrange for the sale of the farm produce, I would seek out the minister of the little chapel there. He was very kind, but a busy man too. He used to talk with me for an hour or so, going over some of the difficult passages with me. One day, as we said goodbye, and I was about to return for another 4 months of exile, he said, "Never mind, Trevor. When you get to heaven, you will know it all." I think he was half joking, but I held on to that and never forgot it. I married and had children and grew old. The children began to work the farm when I was too stiff in the joints to do much in the fields. But I still went on studying my library and thinking of those words. When you get to heaven, you will know it all. Well, I got here, and I have somebody to teach me now. That is lovely, Janet said, and Trevor murmured, heaven is fulfilment. I love to remember that. It's the first thing that angels taught me. We continued our conversation while the light grew dim, and the setting sun blazed a pathway between the trees. Presently, in the rosy glow, we heard footsteps, and Trevor looked up joyfully. Here's the master. The trees parted, and the beloved appeared. He came to stand behind Trevor, motioning us to remain where we were. How ardently I gazed at him. I remembered all that Angel had taught me, and Janet's serene faith, and wordlessly I cried to him in my heart, Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. He understood. He just lifted up his hand and signed me with the sign of the cross, saying, I am he. For a long time there was no sound or movement. We all sat entranced while he poured out upon us the light of his wisdom and love. It came flowing into my heart, pulsing within it like a song. At last he leant over Trevor's shoulder. Trevor looked up in smiling adoration and then opened the book. The master pointed with his finger to a verse. Breathlessly I watched the fingers move over the page. Come, our angel whispered. You are not ready for the mysteries yet. Reluctant but unspeakably happy, we silently crept away. The end.